All right, we're back. Hour two, America First, South Carolina primary tomorrow. So much to talk about. I'm thrilled, elated to bring on my next guest. Um, Now we have to add author to that title, one that I've read and love, and can't wait to get into it with him. But also the man at the New York Young Republicans, Gavin Wax. Thanks for joining me, brother. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me on, Rich. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Me too, Gavin. And we just were kind of getting into it a little bit in the second hour. For people who don't know what I'm talking about, Gavin and Troy together wrote The Emerging Populist Majority, and you should absolutely check it out. This is a book that had to be written. Let me just say that to you, Gavin. Like, this book had to be written. Everyone obsesses over the suburbs. And before we get into New York specifically, I want to bring this up. Everyone obsesses over the suburbs, and I think they're missing the moment. You want to tell everybody real quick what the general thesis of the book is? I think they need to check this
Yes,
out.
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. My book that I co-authored with a good friend of mine, Troy Olson, who's also a big fan of you and your work. It's called The Emerging Populist Majority. It's kind of in the similar vein as the 1960s, the emerging Republican majority, and the failed thesis of the early 2000s, the emerging Democrat majority. But we take obviously a different approach, but we look into the history of electoral politics in the United States and this sort of ascendant and emerging populist coalition that's taking over not only the Republican Party, but the electoral landscape as a whole. We talk about the past, but we make some predictions for the future. Obviously, talk about the changes and the dynamics that have happened. You mentioned the suburbs, but also the changes and dynamics in rural America and urban America, all that have really been accelerated with the rise of President Donald J. Trump. And it basically sort of smashes a lot of the notions and orthodoxies of the establishment and their consultant and donor base, their donor classes, the consultant class, who have been leading the Republican Party astray and have been really dampening our potential electoral wins over the last few cycles.
Gavin, what drives me nuts about those people you were just talking about, and I said this on Twitter before, I'm going to say it now. In its genre, this is the only book in recent memory that is worth reading. It is because you
Uh,
have
Thank you.
Texera, the emerging Democratic majority. You have, of course, from good old 1969. He just recently passed away, by the way. Kevin Phillips, the
Yes.
emerging Republican majority. And nobody's come up with anything in between or explaining what what you could take good that was right from both of those theories and explain why both of them fall short at some point. And Texera was right in if the white working class and if minorities did not continue to shift to a Republican candidate
Right.
like they have to Donald Trump. And that is what really threw, that's what screwed, it was like a cog that screwed up the whole machine, Gavin, you know? But what drives me
Well, they
nuts
were
about these
predicting.
people. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, just to touch on the point you just brought up, they were predicting a state like West Virginia would still be a solid Democrat state in their,
Right.
hypothetical emerging Democrat majority. I mean, they were basically keeping all the trend lines, all the current voting patterns exactly the same in sort of a stasis. And honestly, they probably would have had more credibility if the Republican Party continued to produce the types of candidates that predated Trump, and the Republican Party failed to evolve into a more populist party as it is slowly becoming. Obviously, individuals like yourself or myself would like that to be accelerated, but we could have gone the way of the Tories in the UK and really gone off a
Yeah.
cliff. And then, the Texera hypothesis certainly would have been proven, at least in the interim, to be correct. But it just goes to show that even going back to the early 2000s, that they really made some horrible predictions, and it kind of plays off this sort of end of history type of philosophy that really guides a lot of the neoliberal globalist Western elites, and they just sort of assumed that their ascendancy was inevitable, that they were at the end of history, and basically progressivism has conquered and championed overall, and the Republican Party will be vanquished to become a regional party. When in fact, if we play our cards right, we really could see the Democrat Party becoming really that regional party that honestly it deserves to be at this point, given trends and given the direction of the country.
Well, that's really a great explanation too for why they think the way they do. They're all from that period, the right after the Cold War, the end of history
Yeah.
kind of mindset. It also helps explain whether they obsess over the suburbs the way they do, and have this everything that informs their thinking and their theories is based on this like idea that demographics don't change, political coalitions don't
Right.
change, suburbs don't look differently 4 6 years later, 8 years later. And what drives me nuts about them is that, and especially on the Republican side, is that, and this is what your book does, it really lays this out. After 2012, they spent God knows how much money on that autopsy. And what they really are saying in that autopsy after Romney lost is that you need a party that has an appeal like the one that you and Troy are outlining, the one that Donald Trump is building right now. You would think they would be over the moon, ecstatic about the shift in Queens, ecstatic about how you can see that in so many other areas of the country, and they don't get it. They're not. Why are they not happy that Donald Trump is building this coalition that they claimed in an autopsy they wanted?
I ask this question myself regularly, especially dealing with a lot of these nincompoops in local and state politics, especially, and we're going to get into specifics soon, with, say, the Mozzie Phillip race in New
Yeah.
York 3. But, I think a lot of it is ego. I think a lot of it is just they're really dated. They just don't have a pulse on the direction of the country. They're very just out of touch. They're isolated. They're insular. They're surrounded not really by the demographic that's really reshaping the party, and they're just living in another era. And a lot of these consultants, they're one-trick ponies. I know in New York, a lot of them really haven't won any races since Pataki, and the state has completely changed in the last 20 years. I mean, it's a completely different state. It's a completely different city, and they really haven't changed their messaging, their rhetoric, their style and substance. And when they lose, instead of having a little bit of a introspective moment, instead they double down. And I have it on good authority that when Mozzie Phillip lost, the chairman out in Long Island basically said, "Oh, it's because Nassau County doesn't like a black woman," rather than actually saying, "No, she's a horrible candidate. You ran a poor campaign, and you're not understanding the trends." I mean, at the end of the day, they ran a gay black woman in George Santos anyway, and he still won. Joking aside, but it just goes to show also that they don't understand the suburbs, and that's really their bread and butter. But it wasn't purely a suburban district. This extended into
No.
Queens, and I think there is a certain obsession with the suburbs in Republican circles, maybe because it has a certain socioeconomic appeal to them. The country club, that mode of Republican politics, but it's very hard to understand how irrational and clueless they are, and how they continue to lose and not realize the fault in their strategy and approach.
Outside of the electoral strategy point of view, right? This is why I think one of the reasons why I have and do still argue the urban rural coalition, just from a society standpoint. I wonder if you agree with this. Just from, right now in our politics, it's us against them, this one against the other, black against white, rural against urban. If the rural and urban coalition was created, would it not? I mean, and then the suburbs are just going to have to find, decide what side they come down on. Would it not make for a more stable society, Gavin?
Oh, absolutely. I think this reverse FDR coalition is really what the Republican Party should be trying to build up and embrace, run up the numbers in the rurals and fight on the margins in urban America. I think the suburbs, there's going to be some reversion in the suburbs. I don't think they're completely
Yeah.
lost. It's also, geographically based. Not all suburbs are created the same, but the focus and the obsession they have is really holding us behind. I think we have a lot of, ground to make up, even in rural America. I mean, there's still plenty of places that we haven't maxed out to the same extent that Democrats have maxed out some of their urban cohorts and demographic groups. So we have a lot of work to do there, and I think we also have a lot of work to do in the cities. I think the Republican mentality of giving up the cities, not fighting for it, is extremely flawed. Yes, some of these markets are more expensive from a media perspective, but you move the needle a few points in Queens or in the five boroughs, all of a sudden, New York State as a whole looks competitive when you're getting 33% in the city. So something to consider.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And stay tuned. We're going to have more with Gavin. I'm going to get into more with New York, but you're watching America First with Dr. Gorka. I'm Rich Barris, the People's Pundit, in Forum 833-33 Gorka. Give us your thoughts.
Welcome back to America First with our special guest host, Rich Barris from Big Data Polls.
Yep, this is Rich Barris back, People's Pundit, in for Dr. Gorka on America First. And we're also back with author Gavin Wax, who, along with Troy Olson, wrote what I'm seriously calling, I kid you not, folks, in its genre, the only book worth reading. Very much in the mold of Kevin Phillips, The Emerging Republican Majority, and also Texera's Democratic Majority, Emerging Democratic Majority, but the right one for this time. Gavin, I want to just read you this real quick because, of course, New York 3, big disappointment. They blamed you for. They blamed you and the New York Republican Club for, New York Young Republicans for, which I had to laugh hysterically. And as a pollster, we go back and post-interview people. 54-year-old female from Queens is white, by the way. I forgot to mention that, is white. She gave us 3 reasons why she did not vote in the special election. The first one was that Republicans chose a Democrat and did not give them a chance to vote in a primary or anything like that. The second one was that this Democrat said she would not support Trump if he was convicted, and that they expect him to be convicted. So what would that mean? You're essentially voting for a never Trump Democrat anyway. And then number 3, she said it was a bad precedent, and that basically said, who in hell do you think you are? We vote for who we want. You should never have removed George Santos. And if I was to vote for their hand-picked replacement, we'd set a bad precedent and let them think they can do whatever. So we just had to let them lose this time. How many of those voters do you think were in New York 3, and why on earth would they blame you for the loss?
Well,
why would
it's a good question and great points from this voter. Well, answer your question first. I think there are a lot of voters who felt the same way. I mean, if you look at some of these Republican bastions, let's say in Queens, for example, Mazi either lost them or barely won them. In the latter case, was an example in Whitestone, Queens, which is a very hardcore Republican area. She barely won it. I mean, she just wasn't getting the turnout in the places she needed to get the turnout in. Even in the Nassau portion, you go down to the Levittown area, very Republican area, the turnout wasn't there. You know, what a sea of red was in past elections turned into a sea of light blue on many of the maps that you and I would be looking at. So I think there were a lot of voters who really weren't impressed with her, who weren't motivated by her. And the party apparatus out there, you know, they faked this sort of enthusiasm. They have a very strong political machine, a lot of patronage. I respect it, but they kind of got high on their own supply, so to speak. They did these little rallies for her. They'd get a few hundred people out there, but all those people were because they had county jobs and they wanted to be on the good graces of the local party bosses, not because they were actually enthusiastic for Mazi Phillip. No one was really enthusiastic for her. And for the reasons you listed, the party registration thing was a big one that they underplayed. You had Representative Peter King, former Representative Peter King, going on local radio saying, oh, who cares? No one cares about this. You know, he sounded like Baghdad Bob when they were invading Iraq. A lot of people cared. That's why you had a massive loss. You know, he was doing a spin job of all spin jobs. And then obviously with the Santos thing, I was speaking to a very well-to-do crowd in Manhattan, a very upper middle class, upper class Republican donor kind of group, not the kind of group that necessarily likes my politics or your politics or even George Santos. And I was posed the question about Santos, and I made it very clear that I think it's horrible precedent to remove him, regardless of what you think. And the whole place was applauding. So I do think it's anecdotally, I think there's a lot of voters that fall into that box, and I think because of all of these reasons and more, she lost a very winnable race. And even if it wasn't winnable this cycle, it should have been close. And Tom Suozzi, an institutional Democrat, if there ever was one, ran to her right on issues such as immigration and crime and other things. And she just got completely blasted out of the water on messaging. Meanwhile, she's putting out pressers and statements on Trump and bleeding support. I mean, at the end of the day, the establishment must understand that everything you're doing to win over this elusive, college-educated, upper-middle-class suburbanite wine mom, everything you're doing to win that woman over, that voter over, you're losing 30 people like this woman in Queens that are probably MAGA diehard supporters. They could just stay home. They don't have to vote for you. They'll just stay home, and turnout is key in these races.
Yeah, 100%. They act like everything happens in a vacuum. And when you go and, pander to one group, it doesn't hurt you with another. So you want to look like you're not, a Trump loyalist so you can win over the Valium wine mom. Right. And what is that going to do to some of these other groups that Republicans have been doing so well to bring into the camp in the Trump era? But I'll tell you, they don't learn because they're doing this again with the Senate. And let me just bring this. It's like the Nassau County, they touted the Nassau County operation operation. And from what I hear, it is a good operation. But what does that matter if you don't have a good candidate? So they're like the Tammany of old, only they don't win like Tammany used to. At least Tammany would win, Gavin, right? So they have the same kind of patronage system set up and the same kind of like almost mob-like rule that they how they run it over there, and they don't even deliver the results. And here we go with the Senate. Tell people what they're up to, picking their Senate candidate, and this guy is like doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result.
It's crazy. It's the definition of insanity, and you said it right with the Nassau machine. I mean, it really is very mob-like. And look, they've had some wins and electoral success on Long Island. I think they exaggerate to the degree at which they are responsible for it. I think Long Island has always traditionally been a Republican stronghold. It went to the left, mostly because of Republican corruption and mob-like behavior from former county executives and party bosses out there, many of whom went to jail. And then obviously it was regained in terms of Republican control, mostly because the Dems went so far left and lost moderate support, but also because there was a realignment, national realignment, new trends, things that were ushered in both by President Trump and also Lee Zeldin. They took advantage of that. Do they get some credit? Absolutely. Do they get all the credit? Certainly not. And I think, I want to build machines. I want to build patronage as well if it means we're going to get real successes and conservative populist wins. But if we're just putting up candidates like Mike Sapricone, whatever his name is, we're only going to lose. So this guy was nominated by 100 old geezers up at Binghamton at the most poorly attended New York State convention in the party's history. The party goes back to the 1850s, and they've never had a smaller attendance for a convention. He was nominated there by the party insiders. Nassau has a lot of weight. It's a weighted vote with proxies and delegates and all that. So basically, what Nassau and the Nassau chairman wants, that's what they get. They basically de facto run the statewide party because everyone's scared of them and defers to them for a variety of reasons. So they're pushing this new candidate down everyone's throat. I think partly because they cut a deal with him because he initially wanted to run and be the Mozzie Phillip of New York 3. They said, no, we'll push you for Senate. Then it started coming out all the dirt on this guy. He has a long, interesting history with the New York Police Department, including multiple lawsuits that the city had to settle. Some, gentleman that was wrongfully imprisoned and beaten up. A lot of weird stuff is coming out and will begin to come out. But I think more importantly was his donation history. I mean, this guy has never given a single cent to President Trump. I don't think he's barely given anything to Republicans, but he is a recent six-figure donor. These donations were all within the last few years to a variety of Democrat causes, over $150,000 worth of donations. I think he gave $90,000 to the Nassau Democrat Party to potentially, supposedly, maybe buy his wife a judgeship out there. He gave $40,000 to Tom Suozzi, who just beat Mozzie, an interesting donation there. He's given money to Andrew Cuomo. He's given money to Todd Kaminsky, who was the architect of the disastrous bail reform law. And then it was just revealed he has also given money to Tish James, who was trying to imprison and bankrupt Donald Trump. He did this during her race where she ran on getting Trump and bankrupting him. It's absolutely disgusting. He's going to get destroyed in a primary.
I wish I had another 2 segments with him, folks. Gavin Wax, go check him out. The Emerging Populist Majority. I'm Rich Barris, the People's Pundit, in for Sebastian Gorka on America First. The time is flying. We got a lot of great guests coming up, a lot of great stuff. Thanks to my guest, Gavin. See you.